In 1978, a Soviet forestry worker named Alexei Morozov entered the Carpathian woods at dawn to survey a section of pine forest near the Ukrainian border. He was experienced. He had worked that forest for 11 years. He knew every trail, every clearing, every sound the trees made when the wind came from the east. They found him 4 days later, sitting in a field 12 kilometers from where he entered. He was unharmed. He had no memory of the 4 days. In his notebook, the last entry read, "Something is walking beside me. It has been walking beside me for a long time. It knows these woods better than I do." The Soviet authorities called it disorientation, exhaustion, a psychological episode. The old villagers in the nearby settlement called it something else entirely. They called it the Leshy. For thousands of years, before Christianity swept through the Slavic lands, before maps were drawn and borders were set, the forest was not simply a place. It was a living thing. It had a will. It had a keeper. The Leshy, from the Slavic word les, meaning forest, was that keeper. He was not a demon. He was not evil in the way Western folklore imagines evil. He was something older and stranger than that. He was the forest itself, given form. Descriptions of the Leshy vary across centuries and regions, from the Carpathian Mountains to the forests of northern Russia, from Polish woodland villages to the marshlands of Belarus. But certain details appear again and again, in sources separated by hundreds of miles and hundreds of years. He is tall, impossibly tall. Some accounts say he can grow to the height of the tallest tree in the forest, stretching upward until he disappears into the canopy. But when he walks among humans, he shrinks. He takes the shape of an old man, pale, gray-eyed, dressed in a sheepskin coat worn inside out, and he is always slightly wrong. The buttons on his coat are fastened on the wrong side. His shoes are on the wrong feet. His eyes, when you look closely, have no pupils, and he casts no shadow, not even on the brightest afternoon in summer, when every tree and stone and blade of grass throws a shadow across the ground. If you notice these things, it is already too late. The Leshy does not hate humans. This is important to understand. He is not hunting you. He is not waiting for you the way a predator waits. He is simply the master of his territory, and you have entered it without permission. In the old Slavic worldview, the forest had its own laws, its own hierarchy. You could enter. People entered forests every day to gather wood, to hunt, to pick mushrooms. But you entered as a guest, and like any guest, you were expected to behave accordingly. The Leshy tested that behavior. His most common method was disorientation. Travelers who disrespected the forest, who cut trees carelessly, who killed more than they needed, who entered without the old words of greeting, would find themselves suddenly completely lost. Familiar paths would vanish. Clearings they had walked through 100 times would look strange, alien, wrong. They would walk in circles for hours without realizing it. The Leshy would walk beside them during this time, just out of sight, close enough to hear. Some accounts describe the sound of his presence, a low sound, not quite wind, not quite breathing, moving through the trees just behind you, never getting closer, never falling further away. Others describe seeing him directly, an old man standing between the trees, watching, not threatening, just watching. And when you blinked, he was gone. The disorientation could last hours. It could last days. In the most extreme cases recorded in village chronicles from the 17th and 18th centuries, People were found weeks later, alive but emptied, unable to speak, unable to remember, staring at something no one else could see. The forestry worker Morozov was not the first and not the last. In 1823, a merchant traveling through the Volhynia region of what is now northwestern Ukraine disappeared on a clear afternoon on a road he had traveled monthly for 6 years. He was found 3 days later in the forest, several kilometers from the road, sitting against a tree. He told the people who found him that he had followed an old man who promised to show him a shorter route. The old man had walked ahead of him for what felt like an hour. Then he had simply stopped, turned around, looked at the merchant with those pale, pupil-less eyes, and walked into a tree, into it, like walking through water. In the Hutsul villages of the Carpathians, a region where the old beliefs survived longer than almost anywhere else in Europe, there are accounts collected by ethnographers in the late 19th century of children who went into the forest and returned different, quieter, watching the tree line, refusing to speak about what they had seen. Some of them, the accounts note, would walk to the edge of the forest at dusk and simply stand there, as if listening. The ethnographer who collected these accounts, a scholar named Volodymyr Shukovich, wrote in his notes, "The villagers do not fear the forest, they respect it. There is a significant difference. Fear is what you feel towards something that wants to destroy you. Respect is what you feel towards something that could, but chooses not to." The old accounts disagree on exactly why the Leshy does what he does. Some say he is lonely. The forest is his domain, but he is its only permanent resident, and he collects humans the way some people collect objects, not to harm them, but to keep them close. Some say he is territorial, and the disorientation is simply a warning, a way of saying, "You have gone far enough. Turn back." Others say he makes deals. In several accounts from the Russian north, hunters would make agreements with the Leshy before entering the forest, leaving offerings at specific trees, speaking certain words, promising to take only what they needed. In return, the Leshy would guide game toward them, would keep them from getting lost, would let them move through his territory in peace. The relationship was not between predator and prey. It was between two parties who both understood that the forest belonged to one of them, and the other was a visitor. The old protections are specific, precise. They were passed down through generations not as superstition, but as practical knowledge. The way you might pass down knowledge of which mushrooms are safe and which will kill you. Before entering the forest, you spoke to it. Not loudly, not formally, just an acknowledgement. "I enter with respect. I take only what I need. I will leave before dark." The words mattered less than the intention behind them. You did not whistle in the forest. Whistling was the Leshy's sound. It was how he called, how he communicated across distances. To whistle was to speak his language without knowing what you were saying. The old people said it was like shouting random words in a foreign language. You might accidentally say something you did not intend. You did not point at trees. You did not count the trees aloud. You did not boast about your knowledge of the forest. Saying, "I know these woods, I could never get lost here," was considered an almost direct invitation for the Leshy to prove you wrong. If you felt yourself becoming lost, if familiar paths suddenly looked strange, if you found yourself walking the same ground twice, There was one method recorded consistently across different regions and different centuries. You stopped. You sat down on the ground. You removed your coat, turned it inside out, and put it back on. Then you removed your shoes and put them on the wrong feet. You became, in a small way, like him. Wrong way, inverted, and he would lose interest. The logic in the old worldview was precise. The Leshy existed in a kind of mirror version of the world, where things were reversed. By reversing yourself, you stepped briefly into his world, acknowledged it, and then he had no reason to keep you there. Alexei Morozov, the forestry worker found in that Carpathian field in 1978, never returned to work in the forest. He requested a transfer to an office position and spent the rest of his career behind a desk. He rarely spoke about what had happened. His daughter, in an interview given decades later, said that for the rest of his life, her father would not walk under trees after dark. Not in city parks, not in his own garden. He would stand at the edge of the shadow a tree cast at night, look into it for a long moment, and then take a different route. She asked him once what he was looking at. He said, "I'm checking if it casts a shadow. The forest is older than we are. It was here before the first villages, before the first roads, before the first word was written down. The Leshy was here too, walking between the trees, watching the light change through the canopy, listening. He is patient. He has nowhere else to be." If you want to know which other creatures the Slavic forests hide, subscribe. Next week, the Mavka. She is more dangerous than the Leshy and far more beautiful.